Good day, everybody. Welcome to Shepherd's Corner, our weekly conversation with Archbishop Charles Jason Gordon. Having conversations with him. And for the last couple of weeks, we've been dealing with the whole topic of crime. And this week's article, Lethal Cocktail, Bad Parenting, Inadequate Education, Role Policing. Well, this offers us a powerful critique of the root causes contributing to Trinidad and Tobago's crime analysis. In reading it, I see that his analysis emphasizes that crime is a symptom of deeper societal issues, not just a standalone problem. And he focuses on these three interrelated factors: parenting, education, and policing. Brothers and sisters, let us welcome our Archbishop to the corner. Welcome, Archbishop Charles Jason. How are you?
I am doing well. I am doing well. Wish you well too, as we tackle this very somber but very important topic. Let's just recognize the way that God works in our life and just allow that experience to come, allow that experience to touch us and to move us.
Well, you spoke about a lethal cocktail. So I'm going to ask the question: how do we live with this high crime in Trinidad and Tobago? And I want everybody to remember, this is part three. This is part three of the conversation. How do we live with this high crime in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, for the last few weeks, we've been reflecting on crime in this nation. And as we've seen, crime stems from a complex web of interrelated causes. It's not, we like to look at crime, but when we look at crime, we don't see the underlying forces. And I think the whole attention of the nation has been to crime and solve it. But, it's like looking at the pus out of the wound of somebody's leg and thinking you could solve it by sapping up the pus. No, the reason why the wound is that way, there's reasons why crime is that way. We have to go deeper as a nation, because if we want to move beyond crime riddling our society, we have to move to other ways of engagement in a societal way that allows the society to start drying up the sources of crime. Now, the interrelatedness of it is important to understand. Now, my thesis has been from the first article, or the first Shepherd's Corner, that crime is only a symptom, it's not the cause. So if you go to tackle the symptom, you're not going to dry up the cause, which is creating this symptom. Now, we have to start examining some of the root causes of this problem that we are facing with high crime, high murder rates, high corruption. The fact that a lot of our people have been corrupted, or attempts have been made to corrupt them. What's the cause? What's the cause? In the weeks gone by, I've traced some of the local and international sources, the glorification of lifestyle and the gun, the drug, the human trafficking industry. And this industry, we know that's really, I think, one of the big causes, because it corrupts our people. We even looked at CARICOM that defined crime as a public health issue for our whole region. And what that means. You all remember COVID?
Yeah. Remember COVID? It locked us down. And we worked together to overcome the situation.
And when in a public health crisis, it's not a matter of I doing what I want to do and that's your problem. We have to give up some of our normal rights and freedoms if we are going to actually have the way to move beyond this. And during COVID, the government spoke to us every week and told us what they were doing, what they expected us to do. They told us where the numbers were, and they also told us where the spread was, and some actions that each of us need to take if we were going to bring this back down. So it was a time when the whole nation worked together to deal with this menace and threat. And I think CARICOM is right that if we tackle crime as a public health crisis, then the actions of the government, the citizens, and the faith-based communities, the business, the trade unions, everybody in society would have to work together to solve this major threat to our society.
Yes, it's a all or nothing, all in. So, like when you're playing poker, all in. You're throwing all your whole hand in. We're going all in and together to be able to solve this problem. I remember during COVID, bars were shut, the beaches were shut, the restaurants were shut, and it caused a lot of pain, right? But
a lot of people. So it's the all in, but it's really an all of society approach. Most times we talk about crime, everybody wants to know what the government doing to solve crime. And I think that's a legitimate expectation because that's why we hired them. But it is not as if the government on their own can solve crime. And so we must hold them accountable. And I think that that's vital. But I think we must also hold ourselves accountable. And I think that's also vital. That we have a role to play in this interconnected lethal cocktail that we're facing. But most of all, I think in the analysis for me, most importantly, we saw that as a nation, we're in a state of desolation. And that the focusing on God and the improving of our spiritual practice are key to countering desolation. So desolation is a weakness of the heart, a sense of feeling that God is not with us, a sense of not knowing where God is, and a real disruption of our life of faith and our life of trust and hope in God. So I think understanding desolation is also important, because if there's something of a spiritual twist to all of this, is that we are a nation in desolation right now. We are a nation in desolation. And that's different from depression, that's different from other psychological ailments.
I was glad that you brought in this whole topic of desolation. I don't think many people understood what desolation meant. A lot of people felt it was depression, that kind of thing. But you made it clear.
So the desolation is different from depression. Depression is a psychological state. Desolation is a spiritual state. In desolation, you lose hope. The two could look very similar. But when you misdiagnose, what you then do is you start using pills to come out of a depression. But desolation, no pills bring you out of it. The pills only going to mask the fact that you are in a desolation. If it's a depression, that's a chemical reaction in your body. You need pills to regulate, to balance back the hormones and balance back your body. But in desolation, this is a spiritual state where we experience the absence of God, the absence of hope, the absence of everything that is consolation in our life. And that absence makes us feel as if there is nothing that we have to hope for. And so it's easy to give up and to really think, and God seems distant or not anywhere. And it is in understanding desolation, that we also understand the way forward that we need to move with this challenge that we are facing.
I was very glad that you helped bring that out. You reinforced what is the definition of desolation so that people can now understand the conversation and understand the conversation better.
So you're ready to dive into my lethal cocktail?
I'm ready to go with your lethal cocktail now, right? And I see your lethal cocktail, like you have three things in that lethal cocktail.
Bad parenting, inadequate education, and rogue policing. And I think they are hydra. They're three heads of one monster. So we start with parenting. I would say parenting in Trinidad and Tobago can be divided into three broad categories. I think we have some really great parents, and they instill good character and they instill good discipline in a very healthy way where the child remains healthy. But then we have some parents who think that they're the child's bestie and they want to be best friends with their child. And they don't want to act as parents. What happens then is they spoil their children and they fear their kids will dislike them. So they give in to everything the kids demand and everything the kids want. And rather than becoming best friends with the child actually look down and despise those parents.
Interesting. That's an interesting analysis because I know the parents want to be them. But my child could come and tell me anything. I mean, we are best friends. And boy, they don't know what's going on outside.
And your job as a parent is not to be the best friend of your child. Your job as a parent is to be the best parent of your child. And sometimes, parents use children to fill the emotional void in their own life. And because you have an emotional void, you're using your child to fill that void, which means you're not giving that child what the child needs to grow and develop and become who they're really called to be. And then the third one is parents who adopt a violent parenting style. It's a more traditional way. They see violence as a best response to emotional turmoil. They mirror minor infractions end in verbal and physical and psychological abuse. B.S. Naipaul highlighted this in Miguel Street. And, the verbal, psychological, and physical, sometimes abuse in the parent-child relationship. But you have to see that in our country, in our nation, parenting and family dynamics can be very, very violent.
My question is, how come? I mean, why is it become balance this thing? And truly, I see we've seen some videos of some brutal behavior. Parents with little 2-year-olds beating the living daylights out of a 2-year-old. What can a 2-year-old do?
What can they know?
Warrant
How can
that
they
kind of
understand?
brutality?
And how can that licks even, how can that licks even help correct anything? I mean, I've seen a mother and a child going down the road and the child do some little piece of stupidness, nothing. And I see the mother pick a swig off of a tree and blaze that child. Now, when that little fella grows up, what's going to happen next?
Yeah.
What's going to happen next? But even if the verbal, if a child in the family is a little plump, everybody calling that child fatty.
Yeah.
Baby elephant.
Yeah.
No. And so the child grows up now
yeah.
with a terrible self-image.
Yeah.
but also grows up with a kind of a violence meted out to them.
Yeah. And there are other things that you hear parents say you don't see. You have a hard
Yes.
head. Things like that. I mean, I remember hearing those kinds of things. You know what I mean?
Yes. Or a little fella, and the family name for him was Horseface.
Oh, God. Oh,
You
God.
know, I'm saying these things to
Right.
say how violent the family dynamic
Yeah.
is in
Yeah.
Trinidad and Tobago,
Right.
and how these things cause pain in the life of a child. And we can't separate the violence in our society from the violence in our parenting styles, the violence in our family dynamic. That's basically what I'm saying here. That as we parent in a kind of a violent way, the society is also run in a kind of a violent way. Therefore, we have violence in our society.
See, you talk about these parents are not self-regulated and they lose control. These are the violent ones of their children who also lack regulation, right?
So
But
in
I love what you
psychological
just said there.
terms,
I love this part of your article. And you said, remember, there are no bad children.
none.
There is inadequate parenting.
Yeah. You know, self-regulation or regulation is a psychological term. When any little thing gets you flying off the handle, then you have low self-regulation, which is 90% of the country. Okay? As a nation, our self-regulation is fairly low. Sit in the driving. Sit in our driving, sit in how we treat people as customers in a restaurant, in a government office. And so the self-regulation is pretty low. And I'm saying that parents who fly off the handle at the slightest provocation will raise children who fly off the handle at the slightest provocation. And that's the impulse for violence that is impulse response from very, very, very young in a child's life. And so if the impulse very early when I did something that was wrong was magnified, and you're using an atomic bomb to kill a mosquito, then when I grow up, how am I going to self-regulate? By what I learned. And I'm also saying that this is one of the ways that we need to start looking at the problem of crime in the society, that we have to help parents to regulate themselves better so that children can learn to regulate themselves better so that the citizens of the country can regulate themselves better.
And I just want to throw in something, and this is why it's so important for us to have both parents in the home, because you could just see, if daddy is the only one in the home, he just come back from a stressful day, he has to take care of the children because mommy's not there, or vice versa, which is
Yeah,
normally the main one. Mommy has to work 2, 3 jobs, and she has to also manage these children, maybe 3, 4 children, and she's stressed out. So this is why
yeah,
it's so critical, and this is why God made man and woman, male and female, and the two shall
correct.
become one.
And so that the two can also play tag,
Correct.
so that when one is being triggered, the other one could then say to the child, look, I don't think this is the time for you to be pushing this button. I think this is a good time for a timeout. Because if mom is already charged or dad is already engaged, the other one could just bring this thing down quickly. If you remember the article we did
Yeah.
from Insight Out 1 and 2, with what goes on in the brain of the child, what goes on in the brain of the parent, and how if anger is controlling the console, how the thing goes bad in 3 seconds flat. And that's what I'm saying. You know, there's a really, really, really small percent of children that are sociopaths. They don't have a conscience. So it's not that they're bad, because bad requires you to have a conscience. It is that they are sociopaths. They're psychologically impaired. But bar them, they don't have bad children. We have bad parenting. We have bad community dynamics, bad family dynamics. You don't have bad children. The children learned what they learned from the dynamics in their family and in their community that they have experienced where they are. And that's something that we have to recognize. When you see a child that is getting on consistently bad, that becomes an adolescent that is getting on consistently bad, that becomes a young adult that is getting on consistently bad and doing bad things in society and to society, it started with parenting.
In our plug for CTC community here, we have healing of the father wound started. Hey, call CTC, right? I think that this is absolutely critical because it goes right into here where we're dealing with crime and violence and bad parenting.
I remember years ago in Gonzales, a lieutenant in the gang. This after we had a whole truce and the leaders met and a 4-way conversation in real life to stop what was a war that was escalating out of hand. And we made the decision, no more gunfire in this community. And shortly after that, one of the lieutenants went and fired off a gun. We had already agreed on a ceasefire. He gone and fired off a gun. Well, when I saw him, I quarreled hard with him. I said, who the hell you think you are? Who you think you is? Your leader, all the leaders, and myself have decided no more gunfire. How you could dare to fire off a gun in this community? What he said shocked me. He said, well, Father, I had to send a message. I had to send a message. I said, wait, hold on a second. You had to do what? He said, I had to send a message. I said, how do you mean you had to send a message? He said, well, he treated me like I'm an imps and disrespecting me. And I had to tell him I'm a big man. And you can't disrespect me. So I said, wait, hold on a second. Hold on 1 second. Let me understand something. You used your gun and fired it off because you wanted to send a message. He said, yes. So hold on. You use your gun, you fired it off because you want to send a message. Yes. Well, what's really the message? Well, I's a big man. I said, that's not a message. What's the message? He said, oh, well, the message, I suppose, is stop jumping me. I said, okay, so we have a message. Stop jumping me. I said, how else you think we could have sent that message? He said, well, I don't know how you mean. I said, well, you use the gun to send a message. How else could you have sent the message? What other means could you have used to communicate the message? And I walked him through slowly, until he said, well, I suppose I could have asked you to tell him for me. But you would do that? I said, of course I would. He said, you serious? I said, absolutely serious. So I said to him, I want you to realize you're using your gun to send a message. Your gun is your tool of choice for communication. We could choose to communicate in another way. He said, oh. Now that was a mind-blowing experience for me. That was mind-blowing. I never saw it that way.
So he explained that to you. What he was trying to do was to communicate, listen, I'm a big man. I need respect. You understand? So stop jumping me. Hell of a thing.
Now, the next time something happened between the two lieutenants, he called me. I communicated his message, and the message was then it settled back down. And by the third time it happened, he called me, and I was right next to the other lieutenant, Fatas, and Fatas said, give me the phone, give me the phone. And the two of them quarrel and carried on the phone. I say, my poor phone. Quarrel and quarrel and quarrel. Next time I saw him, I said, what happened to you that night? He said, Father, sorry, I was a lie. But don't worry, me and Father spoke it out. And we came to an agreement. And we understand each other. And we say, you know, we's big men and we really shouldn't have the father carrying message between like if we's little boys. And that was the day that peace really came to Gonzales, you know.
That's right.
Because I took the time to understand why he used the gun. And it was him trying to communicate, because I did brainstorming about how else could you communicate. Because he realized it was a communication problem, he then and the other lieutenant then decided to communicate. And because I modeled for them what communication could be like, they were able to communicate with each other. And that's the day that peace broke out in Gonzales. When we understand poor self-regulation, that was our guy. Both of them had very poor self-regulation. When we understand poor parenting, both of them had experienced fair amount of physical abuse in their childhood. And when you understand how that comes together with poor education, because it did not have language to communicate their emotional experience,
Right.
they were using a gun to communicate their emotional experience. Now, this is a lesson that I never stop pondering, because it's so fundamental to what is wrong in the country right now.
Yeah, but it took you to have that patience, to listen to him, to dialogue with him, and to bring him into the realization there's another way of communicating.
Yeah.
And I think that all community leaders, all community priests and religious, we need to make that same journey with people right now between the gangs.
Correct. Poor education, poor parenting are a lethal cocktail.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're a lethal cocktail. At the other end of the social ladder, I would have to say, I know some privileged youth or youth who grew up in privileged households who rented a house in a very high prestigious community to grow marijuana in that community. So deregulation is not the source of abuse, but it is really the inner lack, because those children were spoiled and they lack boundaries. And that's why, although they came from privilege, they had everything they needed, they still didn't do the normal career, study, grow your business. They went into crime in a big way. Rented a whole house, air conditioned, and was growing this thing. And this is before this was legalized.
Wow. And here's something that's critical, and what we know in terms of studying the role of the father and so on, is that it is the father who regulates, he lays down these little rules and so on for the family.
Yeah.
So you
Correct.
talked about inadequate or bad parenting. Now, the father could have been present, but as you were saying, a
Emotionally,
spoiler,
yeah.
rather than you want to be their best friend. So he spoils
Yeah.
them rather
Yeah.
than saying, hey, you have rules and regulations and you have to follow these rules and regulations.
Yeah. So this child of privilege believes that everything comes on a platter, and white collar crime is still crime. It's still crime. the privilege of lifestyle, privileging lifestyle over character, I think is a cancer that is eating at the soul of our society and of our people. And this quenches your real inner drive to become a better version of yourself. And so you have on the one end children whose inner regulation has been really shattered because of abuse. You have on the other end children whose inner regulation have been shattered because of being spoiled. And both of them, I think, are significant challenges in the nation right now. Education.
I already feel to go on this part because educate this is my pet area.
You know, I think only some children need or are capable of a grammar school education. Grammar school education is what you call it, what the prestige schools offer. Well, they offer a version of it. It's no longer really grammar school in its most classic sense, because a grammar school education will involve Latin and Greek and much more humanities or philosophy. But that education that is preparing you for a university degree and career. And not every child needs that, and not every child is suited to that. And that's not a question of being bright or not bright. And I think that this is one of the fundamental mistakes that we have made, that we want every child to fit in to that model of school. And when they can't, we think it's because they're not bright. No, they're just bright in another way. They're bright in many other ways. So our brightest children are as good as the best anywhere in the world. And in that sense, we've had a really great record of and standard of education. But these children come from every social class and race. It's not just limited to social class or race. But we have to be honest. Society stacks the deck against the poor. And until we are willing to face that fact, we're not going to move out of the problem of crime and violence in our society. The deck is stacked against the poor. If you are a poor child in a poor community where there's a lot of crime and violence, and you don't have a little disposable income, and you go to the school in your neighborhood, then likelihood when at 11 years old, you're graduating to secondary school, you're not going to get the best secondary school to get into. And you're going to fall down into a secondary school where there's crime, violence, and a lot of other unregulated adolescents. And that is going to really be your foundation for whatever happens next in your life. If you have some support systems, you navigate through that and do well. I know children have gone to Mokorapo Junior Sec who have done really well, run business, have degrees, and done really well in trades and in other areas. But you could also fall through the cracks very, very, very quickly. That's the problem. The rich could afford private education and tutors. So a rich child who has a learning difficulty will get tutors or will go to a private school where they're in a smaller classroom and be able to learn in a very different way using a different learning style. The poor do not get that break. They just don't.
So I'm glad that you mentioned this. So how do we, but I know we're talking education, but then how can we provide that education for those people who need that kind of assistance? Because what in the end happens is these kids grow up, they go into schools that are not outfitted for them educationally, right? And then they fall by the wayside.
Mm-hmm. But I wanted to consider a little boy going into a hotspot school and in his own community, which is under-resourced to start with, families under-resourced, there's physical and verbal abuse at home. And think of this little boy sitting in a classroom, which is mixed boys and girls. The girl finds it possible to focus for long periods of time, and his time span and focus is real short. And every time he starts fidgeting because his focus is really short, the teacher's onto him. Johnny, sit up, stop it. Johnny, be quiet. Johnny, why can't you be like Sally? Look, she's doing her work. You do your work too. And that's all he's hearing whole day. Now, the girl finds it possible to do what she needs to do. And I would say that this is an added trauma to the boy because boys' focus is shorter than girls' focus. This is a fact, especially young ages. And also, once he starts recognizing or hearing constantly how bad he is and receiving verbal abuse and punishment as opposed to helping him to regulate, to widen his focus, we have a problem on our hands. We have a serious problem. Add to that the trauma because of the loss of a loved one to violence. Add to that a learning difficulty. You understand the lethal cocktail I'm speaking about in the education system. And you'd also understand that Snake Eye, one of the gang leaders, he's died now, from Gonzales. I've had long conversations with him about his school experience. And that was Snake Eye's story. Okay? The story I just told you was Snake Eye's story. He learned to be a gang leader while in primary school, standing up at the door more often than not, or out in the yard in the hot sun more often than not. He learned how to use badness to lead others to the things he wanted and to get a little bit of self-esteem and recognition for himself.
You mentioned there that Snake Eye has passed away.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But he was a gang leader and he learned badness from school. Yeah. He learned to lead others. He was a natural leader. Yeah. But he learned to lead in the wrong direction because the education system failed him. Rather than somebody recognizing that he had a learning difficulty, right, that he had an attention deficit, and working with him on the challenges he was facing to be able to learn to grow his focus a little bit more and be able to engage in a classroom, he was shamed consistently. And his story is not a unique story.
Yeah, yeah.
So boys' learning patterns diverge from those of girls. They learn at a different rate. They learn a different way. Their focus is really different. But many teachers in the classroom are treating our boys today as if they're defective girls.
And listen, this is going to put a kind of a rift between boys and girls already.
No, it's going to build anger in the boys.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yes.
So we already have the feminizing of the boy, and now we are treating him now as a defective girl because he can't sit down, he can't be still, he can't focus, he can't pay attention the way that the girl in the next desk can. So what we have here is my lethal cocktail.
Yeah.
Many teachers in the classroom are not understanding this. Boys are not defective girls. They're boys. Their brain is wired totally differently. And they need a different educational experience if they're going to flourish. And just look at the underperformance of boys everywhere in the education system, and you understand we have a problem on our hands. Now, boys learn much more from a kinesthetic way. They're much more hands-on. You start to engage a boy in hands-on learning, you see you have his full attention. You play a game, you have his full attention. They need intense focus for a very short period of time, move away, and come back to intense focus. Girls can have longer time of focus. The brain lights up for much longer periods in that focus mode. And the boy, if he's lacking self-regulation, cannot sit still in a classroom for hours on end and learn. He just can't do it. And if he's made to feel inferior at 5 and 6 years old, because the girls are excelling, and he's shamed because of that, he's going to opt out of education, because the boy is never going to pursue something that he can't be good at. That is just how we are made up.
And that's what we are seeing a lot of today. That are big, and it's more with the boys. You find more young men are dropping out of the education system.
Now, if he has already experienced a trauma somewhere in between all of that, he's being shamed for not being as good as the girls. His grades are low by comparison to his sister, who might even be younger than him. What's your prediction? Give me a prediction.
We see that prophecy happening right now in our streets. Look at what is happening. The majority of crimes are being committed by men.
Yeah. And I'm not saying we don't have a problem with the girls. We do have a problem with the girls that is now starting to escalate also. But we also have to learn what we need to do to educate girls. And I'm saying is a little different. And because most of the teachers are female, they default to what worked for them. Therefore, the classroom is set up for what worked for them when they were a child, and what worked for them will not work for the boy. And I'm not saying it's a deliberate ploy. This is no conspiracy. I'm saying that it is inadequate teacher learning method in our classroom.
That I want to see. And this is even, we can dive into this even bigger, because here you have these teachers who are teaching both boys and girls. And it's girls, because the majority of teachers are girls. And they all have their degrees. So you understand where they're coming from, the base on which they're coming from.
Yeah. And their brothers don't have a degree.
Correct. Or else they'll be teaching too. And therefore you find that struggle.
Correct. Now, violent parenting, inadequate teacher methods are a most dangerous combination. They are dangerous. They create rogue elements in our society. And we have to see the connection if we want to create a peaceful Trinidad and Tobago. Every school in a hotspot community, I think, needs 4 things. It needs a parenting program for teachers and parents to help understand how do you parent these children who have different emotional, different neural development, and different needs at that age. How do you exercise discipline in a way that brings out the best of your child? The second thing I think we need, and it should teach them to discipline themselves by helping the child to learn self-control. And so the parenting style has to build upon the child learning regulation, self-regulation, and being able to control themselves more and more as we go along. The second is a trauma intervention should be provided for the entire staff, all the children, and some of the parents. That's not cheap, None of these things I'm saying, because the first one requires that we do serious parenting courses. The second one I'm saying we do trauma intervention, because in our hotspot communities where we have most of our failing schools, The schools aren't failing. The community is failing. The education system is failing. We are failing. The children are not failing. We are failing them. So we need to do a trauma intervention. We've done some in one or two of our schools, and we've seen that when you do that, the whole spirit of the child and the teacher lifts, and something else happens in the dynamic of a classroom. And so that would be my second one, to a whole school approach to trauma intervention. The third one is for me, meditation in the morning and the exam in the afternoon. I am sold on this, Every time I lead children into meditation,
Yeah.
I just see them light up and glow. And the examine, that's a gym for conscience. It wakes up the conscience so they start understanding regulation a lot better. And my last one is Tim Conway's Now program, which helps children to reconnect the neural pathways and reintegrate learning by connecting back the brain, connecting back the sound with the movement of the lips, and with the vowels and spelling that is happening. And again, that's not cheap. It's a big investment. But if we say, look at what crime is costing us today.
Correct.
Let us invest in our in our schools that are most in need right now. Let's just invest in them. Then 10 years from now, those schools and the communities would start being transformed in significant ways already.
So I see it as being a good investment. And any good investment, is not a quick fix. It's not like a pyramid scheme.
No,
And therefore, we may look at the initial outlay as being expensive, but I'm thinking here, okay, the initial outlay is expensive, but guess what? It's far cheaper than building more jails.
Housing a man in jail.
Correct.
Which I think the last number I heard, which was not recent, it was a far ago, was about 70,000 a year to house a man in jail. So it's a lot cheaper to invest. So my third pillar is rogue policing. And you would say, but how would this meet up with the other two? Because dysregulated parents who use abuse for children who go into schools that are where the teachers are dysregulated and abusive, when they become officials of the state,
wow,
the regulation does not change. I'm just using one example, which is policing. And a thing I'm seeing in the country that has alarmed me no end, which is rogue policing. Rogue policing. So a few years ago, there's a buckle up moment, okay? There's buckle up. A few years ago, I was in Sea Lots on a property. We just opened the school on that property last weekend. And I was with one of the members of the community who was, they call him shady at best, but he was organizing the men to cut the grass which had overgrown the compound. And so he and I were there talking about the grass and the compound, and he's coming in to cut it, how many men he's going to bring in, that we're going to have to help him with this and that. And we're having this conversation. And the next thing I knew, members of the tactical squad, and we weren't in the front of the building, we were towards the back of the building where the grass was really high. Members of the tactical squad came around the opening into the space where we were standing. And there were guns pointing on him and on me.
What?
Now, yeah.
Guns, you say guns were pointed at both of all, yeah?
Guns pointed at both of us. I was dressed in a clerical shirt with my usual cross on, as you see me here right now. Now, on him, I saw a red laser on his head and a red laser on his chest, on him. And there are two men pointing gun at me. So I imagine I had a red laser on my forehead and a red laser on my chest. And the tactical squad, and there's the blue one, the blue uniforms with bulletproof vests, masks, ski mask, and berets and stuff. That's the grouping. The next thing that happens, I said, they tried to separate us. And he started shouting louder and louder and grabbed onto something and wouldn't let it go. Because he well know if he went into a place where I couldn't see him, any number could have played. He knew that. And there was just fear in him. Total fear. Then I said to the guys pointing the guns at me, I looked straight at them. And I said, do you have a warrant to come into this property? This is private property. I'm the owner of this property. Do you have a warrant to come on my property with guns on it? Did you ask anybody permission? Why are you here? And they tried to silence me. I then said to them, I am the Archbishop of Port of Spain. This is my building. You take these guns off of me right now. They were unmoved. They were unmoved. I even said to them, in the precedent list in this country, I am number 13 on the precedent list. Move these guns now. They were unmoved. A gun and a gun. Red dot, red dot.
What?
Okay? Yeah.
You never shared this with your partner before?
No. I hold it till now. There was absolutely no respect. There was complete disrespect, complete brute force, complete intimidation with really big guns. And they didn't ask any questions. They then wanted me to empty my pockets. And I refused. I said, take the gun off of me. We can have any conversation you want when the gun is off of me. The gun remained. Then one of them who was not there came in. And I think when he came in and he saw, I could see kind of a shock on his face. And he said to the guys who had the gun on me, he called them and he said, listen. Drop your guns. And then he started to talk to me. And I said to him, this is completely out of order. But anyway, let me leave that one alone. But it was illegal. What the police did was rogue, and it was illegal. You remember the man who fell off the chair?
What's I can remember the man who fell off the chair?
Okay. And died in a police station?
Yeah, he fell off and he died.
Right. So he was from a community, and early in the morning, the police came and banged on his door. He opened the door. They dragged him out onto the porch and they beat him mercilessly in front of his wife and his 11-year-old son. Okay? Eventually, when the wife asked, what is this about? They said, well, he kidnapped the Barrett girl. And she said, no. He said, well, this is his car. He said, but he rents the car. That car was rented. And then she pulled the rental sheet and handed it to one of them. And when he read it, he said, all right, fellas, cool it. But by then, he was so badly beaten that they took him with them. And the only thing we heard was that he fell off a chair in a police station and died. That was that guy. Recently, and this is the reason why I'm telling this story, because of this third one. This is happening within the last month. The police were doing an activity in a community where we have a home for young women. And one of the supervisors of the home was leaving at the same time. She opened the gate, saw all of this activity happening with guns and all kinds of things. She closed the gate back and went back inside the house and said to the girls, girls, come away from outside. Something is happening there. I want you to, and she was now trying to settle the girls inside the house away from harm. At the same time, two men in plain clothes started banging down the door banging on the gate downstairs. When nobody came, they jumped the fence and they came up to the door. And so the supervisor came out and said, do you have identification? Then plain clothes. And they're saying, I don't need identification. Open this door now. They broke down that door. They broke down a second door. They broke down a third door. This is a home with girls who are traumatized.
I know it.
This is a home for girls who are traumatized already. And these men, not in police uniform, in plain clothes, no badge, no identification, broke down the door and came in. Now, I would say that is a rogue element in our society. It's a rogue element in our society. They have employed a very aggressive strength and in a home for very vulnerable women. And I think if we can't see the connection between violence perpetuated by the state, both in education and in policing, and violence in parenting as a significant contributor to where we are as a society, then we're not understanding what is happening right now.
People, this is part 3 of our conversation. Part 3. And he's talking here about this lethal cocktail. Now, we only have a couple minutes ago, but this conversation, I want you all to watch it, This is a lethal cocktail, and he's talking about the interconnections here.
So I want us to recognize here at least a couple of things. Inappropriate parenting, inadequate education, and rogue policing are interconnected realities that are perpetuating violence in our society, Trinidad and Tobago. There are others, huh? There are others. But when I ask myself, was he top 3? Was he top 3? You see, when I was in Gonzales, in those days they had that other one in the gray vans, the something TF, ICTF or something. Policing is police army joint patrols. And I remember seeing the van coming up the hill, a little fellow walking down, and I know the guy, he was a decent guy. He wasn't a stupidness, walking down the hill. And as the van reached up alongside him, one of them reached out and grabbed the guy by the scuff of his neck. The vehicle dragged him a little bit, but then stopped. He came out still grabbing the guy and then told the guy, take everything out of your pockets. So the guy started to take things out of his pockets, and he had some loose dollar notes, and the dollar notes started to float all down the hill. So I went and started picking up the boys' money. I came up to them and I said, gentlemen, this is not called for. You could have asked this guy to stop. If he refused to stop, that's different. You could have asked him to stop. You could have treated him with a little bit more respect. That day, I decided to go and see the Minister of National Security to change how things were happening in the community with policing and ask for community policing, because I saw the police forcing the boys into gang life, because the police was acting like another gang inside of the society, inside of the community.
Wow.
So we need to see inappropriate parenting, inadequate education, and rogue policing as interconnected realities perpetuating violence. Each of these three adds to the crime pandemic that CARICOM has diagnosed. Wasn't my diagnosis. That was a CARICOM diagnosis, a public health matter. And each of these three really creates the conditions for escalating crime over the next 25, 30 years of our society. Disrespect by the police makes young citizens feel very powerless. And when you make a boy feel powerless, you do something terrible to him. Abusive parents and outdated education methods also contribute to a violent society. And also they create havoc amongst us. At this stage, I am proposing that we have to unite as a nation to equip our parents to foster their children's emotional well-being. And we need to change our educational model, especially in the schools in our hotspots. And this will require, among other things, implementing the 4 programs that I spoke about. And also testing for learning problems, etc. When we are ready as a nation to grow up to our next stage, these are some of the things we have to tackle head on and really, really seriously if we want the next generation of Trinidad and Tobago to be more peaceful than what we are experiencing right now.
You shared your own experience. You shared your own experience here. So what is the key message? Because we reached that time. What's the key message?
Families, schools, and governments pass violence or peace down through generations. To have a peaceful nation, we must change this. The family, the school, and the community must learn to respect each person, and then we'll be able to build peace in our nation. Action step. We have to review our language, our attitudes, and the ways that we relate to people. Because the stories of violence that are described by the police are one thing, but we do that to each other. Every day on the street, every day in the workplace, at home, domestic violence, etc. Are we passing on peace or vulnerability, shame, and powerlessness, and thus violence to the next generation? What are we passing on? And I'm asking people, meditate. Start meditating every day. It helps us with our self-regulation. And our scripture reading. You've heard how it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist one who is evil. But if anyone strikes you on your right cheek, turn your left also. And if anyone would sue you, take your coat, let him have your cloak and a tunic as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with them. Give to whoever begs you, and do not refuse who would borrow from you. And this is how Jesus saw us responding to violence, not with more violence, but with more generosity of heart.
Archbishop, say a little prayer with us because we've come to the end of another week's show.
Father, we recognize in all of us is this capacity to be violent with another and to lash out and to bring to the other our unregulated self. We pray that you give us wisdom as a nation to find a path forward towards building a culture of peace. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord.
Amen. Thank you again, Archbishop, for a wonderful day. Lethal cocktail, bad parenting, inadequate education, and rogue policing. Watch us tonight, 8 o'clock, and on Sunday. God bless you.